Chapter 5. The One. As Henrik departed the council chamber with Karas by his side, the weight of his new mission pressed down on him like the very mountains surrounding Tantua. The air in the city felt thick with uncertainty as they made their way through the narrow, winding streets back toward the Dwarven King's throne room. Henrik glanced at Karas, his brow furrowed. "Dganger, what kind of king is he?" Henrik asked, his tone neutral, though curiosity burned in his eyes. Karas tapped his staff against the cobblestone, the rhythmic sound echoing off the stone walls. "Dganger is no ordinary king, Henrik. He's the embodiment of our people's will, both their strength and their isolationism. The Dwarves of Tantua have always followed a strict code, and he's held to that with iron resolve." Henrik nodded, though he remained quiet. He had seen the tension in the council, how some were resistant to aiding Kipt, their loyalty to the mountain seeming to overshadow the threat of the unkind. But it was Dganger's final decision that would matter most. They arrived at the entrance to the throne room where 2 guards stood, their armor gleaming in the light of enchanted torches. The doors opened with a low creak, revealing the grand chamber of the Dwarven King. This room, unlike the other parts of Tantua, was majestic in its simplicity. The walls were carved directly from the mountain's bedrock, smooth and unblemished. Massive stone pillars rose to the vaulted ceiling, where intricate carvings of dwarven history and myth stretched across the surface, lit by floating runes. At the center of the room was a raised platform, on which sat a stone throne, carved with runes of power and protection. Dganger sat upon that throne, his eyes closed in thought, his muscular frame cloaked in an ornate robe of crimson and gold. The crown upon his brow was simple, but forged from the purest iron, with small gemstones embedded at its center, each representing the elements of dwarven craftsmanship: fire, metal, and stone. His yellow eyes opened slowly as Karas and Henrik approached, their gaze piercing and sharp. "Karas," Dganger said, his voice deep and resonant, "you've returned with the human." "Yes, my king," Karas replied, bowing slightly. Dganger's eyes flicked to Henrik, narrowing slightly. "So you have agreed to the tasks set before you. Do you truly understand what you're asking of us, warrior of Kipt?" Henrik took a deep breath, stepping forward. "I do, and I will prove my worth by completing the tasks your council has set. But I also understand that our kingdoms have a shared history, one marked by both cooperation and betrayal. I'm not here to dwell on the past, but to forge a new alliance." The room fell silent as Dganger leaned back on his throne, his hand absent-mindedly brushing the runes etched into the stone armrests. His expression was unreadable, though the tension in the air was palpable. "Do you know why our people closed their doors to the world, Henrik?" Dganger asked, his tone contemplative rather than accusatory. Henrik shook his head. "I know that there was a great betrayal, but the details have been lost to time, at least in Kipt." Dganger's eyes gleamed with a hint of bitterness. "Lost to time, perhaps, but not to us." He stood from his throne, the weight of his presence filling the room. "We were once part of a grand alliance with Kipt and the other realms of men. We shared our knowledge, our craftsmanship, and in return, we sought protection. But when the time came, when the unkind first emerged from the shadows, we were left to fend for ourselves." He began pacing, his heavy boots echoing off the stone floor. "The armies of Kipt were promised but never came. The elves, the humans, even the Osirisans failed us, and so we sealed our doors and vowed never to rely on outsiders again." Henrik felt a pang of guilt, though he hadn't even been alive during the events Dganger spoke of. "And yet," he said slowly, "I stand before you now asking for your help." not as a man seeking to right the wrongs of the past, but as someone who knows that the future depends on us, working together. De Ganger stopped his pacing, turning to face Henrik once more. You speak boldly, warrior, but words alone will not sway me. Actions speak louder, and you have 5 tasks to prove your worth. Henrik squared his shoulders. I will complete them, De Ganger. And when I return, I hope you will see that this alliance is not just for Kipt, but for Tantua as well. The king's expression softened slightly, though there was still steel in his gaze. We shall see. Karas, who had remained silent through much of the exchange, finally spoke. De Ganger, I believe there is more at stake here than either of us fully grasps. The unkind are not a threat that will stop at Kip's borders. If they gain enough ground, even Tantua will not be safe. De Ganger looked at his old friend for a long moment before nodding slowly. I do not doubt the seriousness of the threat, Karas, but the safety of my people comes first. Karas' expression was unreadable, but he gave a slow nod. As it should, my king. Henrik felt the weight of the exchange settle over him like a heavy cloak. De Ganger was not a king who would be swayed easily, and the road ahead seemed steeper than ever. Still, he knew there was no turning back now. De Ganger returned to his throne, his gaze lingering on Henrik for a moment longer. Go, warrior of Kipt, complete the tasks. Only then will we speak of alliances. Henrik bowed his head slightly in respect, then turned to leave the chamber. Karas followed, his staff tapping lightly against the stone floor. As they exited the throne room, the tension in the air seemed to dissipate slightly, though the weight of the tasks ahead hung heavy between them. Henrik's mind was already racing, planning how he would tackle the first challenge, finding Riga, the ogre. Before they could take more than a few steps away from the throne room, a stout dwarf approached them from one of the side corridors, his short beard neatly braided, and his eyes gleaming with intelligence. His armor, though simple, was adorned with various tools of his trade, including a hammer and chisel strapped to his side. This was Geowasser, the snarky master of craft, known for his sharp tongue and even sharper mind. Ah, the human, Geowasser said with a smirk, his eyes flitting over Henrik. Off to complete our little tasks now, are we? Henrik met his gaze evenly. That's the plan. Geowasser chuckled softly, crossing his arms. Well, let's see if you come back in one piece. And remember, the skull of Rhaegar isn't something you can just stumble across. Good luck with that. Henrik couldn't help but smile at the dwarf's sarcasm. I'll manage. Karas nodded toward Geowasser. We'll be back before you know it, Geowasser. Keep the forges burning. Geowasser rolled his eyes. As if I need reminding. Henrik and Karas continued their walk down the stone corridors, the flickering torchlight casting long shadows along the walls. The path ahead was dangerous, but Henrik felt more determined than ever. He wasn't just fighting for Kipt now, he was fighting to prove himself to the Dwarves of Tantua and to the one, De Ganger.